The Hainan Island incident of April 11, 2001, came just 6 months before 9/11. It was surprising to many. I was not surprised by it, having been prepped by the jet play over the water separating Big and Little China. China was testing. Were the engineers running China happy with the Hainan Island incident? Christensen raised the specter that China is a much divided government, its right and left hands apparently flailing past one another. Ultimately, they don't, of course. Flail, that is, to themselves, regardless of how the outsiders see things. An uncoordinated China could not have built an economy from barter level, exchanging rice for paper in 1949, still predicting, despite a horrifically and catastrophically ruined economy, that in 50 years it would be the top economy in the world, and nearly succeed in achieving it, despite one crushing blow after another, if it were a flail, some people. Does a triumph of the will ring a bell? So the discussion of the mini-bureau China flailing around in the dark, well, what do you think? It seems a bit of a mésanalysis, twinned to a tendency of mésalliance. Is it a way to give the Chinese government a bit of slack? To declare that the military was insubordinate, acting peremptorily? We may forgive the act, therefore, of a naughty child. If that were the case, as Christensen finds, that it is simply a matter of one bureaucracy not knowing what the other is up to, we might be hopeful in that. However, I don't quite think anyone involved was punished over the Hainan Island incident. In fact, I rather suspect a banquet was called on the matter and a round of toasts made. Furthermore, I entirely disagree with the conclusion that emphasizes the naughty child thesis. I believe that the Hainan Island incident ultimately leads back to a question of respect, and with a sense of respect both entirely defined in Chinese terms, and one shared by each and every Chinese, although the act may not be. In other words, the United States has to be forced to respect the Chinese interpretation of events, which was all about the question of respect, in Chinese style, of course. Maybe the deed troubled some Chinese, but the greater issue of teaching respect trumped the wobblers. In fact, it trumped a lot of things, because if there were any Chinese who questioned the government's behavior internally before the incident, they wouldn't now. For the United States apparently kowtowed to China, as the Chinese would see it. And if the United States could be brought low, certainly dissenting Chinese might be brought even lower. Such was the mischief-making going on in recent years in Asia, of China to her neighbors, and even of China towards the United States. I thought it peculiar that the incident occurred before 9/11, almost precursing a certain disrespect for the United States, which was ultimately shown by the bombing of the United States on 9/11. It still troubles me, the act and the timing of the Hainan Island incident, but that is not our discussion here. Putting it into the context of this essay, was China only demonstrating that there was a new order arising in its neighborhood? Was it sensing that the United States, if not powerless then, maybe she might be in the near future, and she ought to recognize the new order of things? If the United States were to so recognize that things were changing, that there was a new boss in town, then relations between the two superpowers would go on. If not amicably, they could still go on. Finally, had the Hainan Island incident woken up the Americans? Had they learned their lesson of respect? Could they also please say it in Mandarin? The Chinese simply felt the Americans were not showing respect in East Asia for the territorial integrity of China, and China wasn't to be fooled with. Thus, the Hainan Island incident. The military committed the act to force that respect. The need to perform such an act may be argued among the Chinese, but beneath it all, the fact that China forced the Americans to respect her, well, every Chinese appreciates that. Interestingly, in past history, the The Hainan Island incident would have led to war. Interestingly, nowadays, no one wants war, so everyone backed down, but it remained a warning shot across the bow, and American prestige suffered. It sent a clear signal to East Asia and reverberated around Southeast Asia in just a few minutes, much like the last weekend before the outbreak of the Korean War. An element of American power and control was lost forever. It cannot be said that it took a weakened American economy to unfetter a powerful China. It was already happening years ago. We were finally back to our position as paper tiger, unfortunately so in the eyes of Asia. If not true, it certainly must have seemed so to them. It also demonstrated how much we want and need China, as does most of the world apparently. Evidently, we would respect our way out of war, and perhaps all the way back to the Pacific and Atlantic coastlines of the United States. Behave by respect, and the relationship would continue in stability. Otherwise it simply wouldn't. Remember that respect is the core to all dealings with China, period. The definition of what is required to show respect for China, that is the question. Does it extend to allowing China to become the ultimate power in the region? Perhaps. Does it require that the United States allow for a currency crisis to be resolved in China's favor? Perhaps. That certainly seems so. Does it require that borders be respected enough to allow China to maintain control over Tibet and to place troops in Pakistan so that India might realize that playing in China's backyard can be a two-handed game if there is no respect? Perhaps. That single word can lead to resolving the curiosity of what the Chinese require for stable relations with its neighbors and with the world. Yes, that's right. The answer lies dynamically in respect. I part company with Professor Christensen, who believes that China has a diversity of management, so much so that one bureau of government doesn't know what the other is doing. It may appear to the outsider to be so, but despite the appearance as such to outsiders, I contend that it is simply categorically defined as Chinese style of governing. How Chinese style is defined? I can't define it. In Hawaii, we simply say there is Korean style, Chinese style, Filipino style, Portuguese style, Haole, Caucasian style, and of course, Hawaiian Kanaka style. The job gets done, but how? We have an idea, but it's not something written in stone. It is an amorphous cultural preference for how things get done. They do get done, by the way. And that is why you need a Chinese partner for a business. And you certainly need a Chinese partner when Washington wants to make an agreement with Beijing. It is not to surrender, but is the means of getting things done. Of course, respect lies at the bottom of Washington-Beijing, just as it does for a Colorado business trading in China. A partner acts as a cultural interpreter, not only as a linguistic interpreter. Employing that notion will get nations in common motion every time, if that is what they seek. Whatever Chinese style may ultimately be, it functions. It has brought prosperity. So dysfunctionally separated government bureaus, as the West sees it, don't seem to have affected the Chinese economy much, if at all. It is the same as looking at a plant in engineering controls. We may not know what goes on inside the plant. We only know that we achieve a positive outcome only by adjusting the input. Correct what goes in by what comes out of the plant. As long as it functions, and evidently it functions well in the case of the Chinese economy, the only thing we need to know is how to tweak the input to continue that fabulous output. The rest remains an academic exercise, and perhaps not any of our business after all. But then we probably don't care what goes on inside the plant. if the example of acquiescence with China's internal social policies are any example of anything, especially of the apathy of the American business community, if it's any measure of things. Well, really, we hardly like it brought up about our genocide towards the Native Americans and the Kanaka Maoli and the enslavement of blacks that we bought and sold from Africa. There is observed by Christensen and other scholars of the Chinese ethos that the Maritime Bureau is a good example of an unwieldy bureaucracy with several administrative bureaus under its wing. The coordination amongst these divisions is far from clear, as some scholars vouchsafe. Yet even in pointing this out, Professor Christensen did not attempt to explain why, if there is so much dysfunction in the Maritime Bureau and other similar bureaus, and every other Chinese bureau of government, that China continues to grow and prosper, and a distant second-tier city like Kunming has 50 foreign countries doing business there. If the dysfunction is significant, it does not seem to reverberate in the prosperous Chinese economy. Specifically with the Maritime Bureau, he does not explain the new Chinese carriers and their missile launch capability, nor the buildup of thousands of small landing craft, nor those pesky invisible Chinese subs that pop up out of nowhere, right in the middle of our war games. No, whatever the Chinese are, they aren't victims of overweening, misguided, or flailsome bureaucracies. They certainly seem to be a product of a well-financed, well-managed economy. If one wants to condemn China for following a 10-year plan, I think we ought to rethink that condemnation. If they are the sum of their bureaus, they are formidable, rather than being incoherent. A strange evaluation for success machine China. If this is an example of disorganization, the United States could use a bit of it.